Hello, this is Professor James Strickler, and this is a course in American government. This lesson is from Unit 6 about interest groups and political parties, and it's Lesson 9 concerning litigation. In this lesson, you'll learn about institutional reform litigation, about disproportionate power, venue shopping, and ideological usage of litigation. In previous lessons, we've been learning about the methods that interest groups use to accomplish their purposes. We learned first about inside lobbying, then about outside lobbying, and in the last lesson about electoral activities. In this lesson, we'll learn about litigation. Concerning the topic of litigation, there's 4 things that we want to discuss. The first of those is called institutional reform litigation. Interest groups bring lawsuits sometimes to try to change society. An example of this can be seen in the background picture here. It shows a crowded prison. That's the kind of thing that interest groups in the past have often brought lawsuits about, to try to reform prisons. When groups bring lawsuits like this to try to change some sort of institution or aspect of society, that is called institutional reform litigation. That is the kind of legal activity that interest groups engage in. The second thing about litigation that we want to talk about is disproportionate power. When these interest groups bring lawsuits, it allows them to have disproportionate power. Now, what does that mean? It means that even small interest groups can change society. And when I say small interest groups, I don't just mean the interest groups with few members, but interest groups with limited resources. They can change society by getting the cooperation of the courts. As a matter of fact, in the most extreme scenario, an interest group could change society with only 6 people on its side. They would need the one person bringing the lawsuit, and then 5 justices out of the 9 on the United States Supreme Court to agree with them. And they could overrule the rest of America on whatever their preferred topic is. That's how powerful litigation can be, and why it's so attractive to small groups with little resources, because they can have incredible influence way beyond what their numbers and resources should have, simply by getting the right judges to agree with them. The third aspect of interest group litigation that we want to talk about is called venue shopping. Interest groups, when they bring a case, they look for the right plaintiff to be their representative. Sometimes they will hunt around, advertise, bring in people for tryouts even. They'll try to find somebody who's in the kind of situation that they want to sue about, who they believe is an attractive person to then be complaining about it. Somebody that the courts will look at with sympathy. For example, in the picture in the background here, we see Linda Brown, the child who was the main plaintiff in the famous Supreme Court case of Brown versus Board of Education that ended segregation in public schools. One reason that they chose Linda Brown, the interest group that was involved here, was because she was a cute little girl, and because of who her family was, and the situation they were in at their school, and all that sort of thing. It fit perfectly with what they were trying to accomplish. We'll actually talk about that in more detail later in this course. In addition to trying to pick the right plaintiff, they also try to make sure that the person they're picking is in the right place. This is what's called venue shopping. The interest group looks around the country at all the many courts where they could bring their lawsuit in, and each of those is described, legally speaking, as a venue. Then what they do is they try to find the venue that has the judges in it that will be sympathetic to their cause. Now, you may wonder, well, aren't the judges the same everywhere? Aren't they just applying the law as it is? You'll learn much later in the course that no, that's not true. that in fact the opinions of judges can vary widely. And so if the interest groups can keep track of what kind of judges have what kind of views and what kind of courts, then they can go look for plaintiffs in those areas that will be most favorable to the outcomes that they want. Then what they do is the interest group provides all the legal costs for this person to actually go to court. So they find somebody that's facing the problem that they want solved, and they make sure that that person is in the right sort of place. Actually, they probably do it all the other way around. They find the right sort of place, and then they find the right kind of person there. And then what they do is they offer to cover all their costs if they're willing to sue. And they hope in this way they'll end up getting favorable verdicts in the end. The last aspect of interest group litigation that we want to talk about is its ideological usage. Now, previously in this course, you learned about how the English politician Edmund Burke gave rise to what we now today call conservative political philosophy. And one of the basic ideas that he put forward that still exists in conservative political philosophy today is that it's really easy to tear down things. It's really easy to rush forward and make radical changes that in the end up being harmful, that they end up tearing up things that have worked. Basically, the attitude of a conservative is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, because that's the basic attitude of conservatives, they're going to be far less likely to make use of institutional reform litigation. Remember, the point of institutional reform litigation is to get a ruling from a court that forces government or society to change in some way. Well, conservatives aren't going to be going around all the time looking to change things through the courts. That means that institutional reform litigation, these lawsuits brought by interest groups, designed to change government, politics, and our entire society, are primarily brought by liberals and liberal interest groups. An example can be seen in the background here of protesters outside the United States Supreme Court building, awaiting the ruling in the Supreme Court's gay marriage case. The plaintiffs in that case were among a whole class of people in the country who supported gay marriage, but had been unable to persuade politicians through other channels to agree with it. With very few exceptions, every time the issue of gay marriage came up for a vote, either among the people or among the politicians in America, it was voted down. And so the supporters of gay marriage realized that their only path to success wasn't to go through politicians and voters, but was to override politicians and voters by getting the judges to declare that there was a constitutional right to this. And they succeeded. So this is the path that many liberal interest groups will take as they try to change society. They'll try to make use of the courts, make use of the disproportionate power of institutional reform litigation, and get what they want that way. That completes this lesson. Now let's review what we learned. What is the purpose of institutional reform litigation? Is it to support politicians? Is it to follow public opinion? Is it to win money? Or is it to change society? Institutional reform litigation is designed to change society. How is the power of litigation disproportionate? Is it that it has little impact? Is it that it's very expensive? Is it that small groups can win big? Or is it that only big groups are successful? It is disproportionate because small groups can win big. What is venue shopping? Is it simply the act of appealing a case? Is it hiring the best lawyer? Is it bribing a judge? Or is it suing in a sympathetic court? Venue shopping is the process of finding judges that you'll believe will be sympathetic to your cause, and then finding the right plaintiff in that area to bring the case for you. What type of group is most likely to sue? Is it a liberal group, a conservative group, a reactionary group, or one with lots of lobbyists? it's probably going to be a liberal group, because these lawsuits are brought to change things, and liberals are more likely than conservatives to want to change things. It's also, just to talk about the last possibility there about lobbyists, if a group can afford lots of lobbyists, then it's probably really not looking to litigate. This is a method that's going to be more likely used by groups that don't have the money for a bunch of lobbyists. That completes this lesson. The next lesson will be from Unit 6. It'll be Lesson 10. It'll be about political parties.